Greetings and welcome back to all of our Joy Radio listeners and to all of those that tune into the Crossfire podcast on Spotify. Welcome for those that are listening to us for the first time in 2026, which I really hope are just a few out there. We all know that the Joy Radio listeners are listening to Joy Radio 24/7, 365 because you can stream us from the website, joygr.com, and you can download the app and have us on your devices wherever you go and tune into the amazing content on Joy Radio. Shout out to all the new presenters and all the new content providers that have joined us in 2026. Very, very exciting to have everyone on board and see the station grow and go from strength to strength. And a special shout out to Pastor Barry for all the work he does and the board at Joy Radio. The behind the scenes guys, thank you for everything that you do. Thank you for making this platform available for us to spread the good news and to hopefully edify our listeners, especially our Christian brothers and sisters that are tuning in. Welcome. And guys, you know what? I keep saying that I need to get on with this, the digital sessions that I've got planned regarding our digital spaces and AI technology. How as Christians do we fit into this bigger picture? How do we utilize our platforms? And then also delving a little bit deeper into the digital marketing side of things for churches, faith-based organizations, MPOs, NGOs, small, medium enterprises. But it seems like there's a lot of stuff that I've been going deeper into recently, and God has been putting a lot of things on my heart. So I've been actually putting my ministry cap on a lot more than I'm used to. And today I've decided to speak about fear and dominion. And you might go, Vaughan, what on earth? And these are both good things, guys. They are not bad things. And we had a very good message by Pastor Anthony Stander from Living Waters Church this past Sunday here in Cape Town. And I have mentioned, and he spoke a lot about fear. And then I also, in our church under my Pastor Aaron Munsami and CARESChurch in Durban, our theme for the year is dominion. And you can go to the CARESChurch Facebook page to go and see all the different messages that have been already spoken about regarding our dominion and our attitudes as Christians regarding dominion. But I just find that there's a lot of threads that are connecting all these different sermons that I'm listening to lately. And the one on fear this last Sunday really struck me. And one of the comments is why I decided to go into this from a theological and etymological point of view. Etymology is just a study of the origin of words. I actually took this as an extra subject in my final years of school. I was at an ACE, an Accelerated Christian Education School, and they offered etymology as an addition, and I took it, and I was really fascinated about the origin of words and studying the origin of words. A lot of people don't know this about me, but I enjoy going deeper into the root. So if I had to give my message this morning that I want to speak about regarding fear and dominion a title or a subtitle, I would call it the root versus the fruit. So when the Bible speaks about fear of God, a lot of us, we get a little bit confused about this because it's not really about being scared. So what is the context and what does this fear actually lead to? And in this last Sunday's sermon by Pastor Anthony Stander from Living Waters Church, there were a few comments in the comments section. And I want to look at one of these comments because it really struck me. And this is what got me going deeper into this. And the word fear and how it is framed regarding our relationship with our Father is where I'm tackling this from. And I'm going to tie this into dominion as well, because this goes very good together. You cannot have one without the other. Let me just read this comment for you, because when you read this comment at face value, and guys, there's nothing wrong with this comment. We are all Christians, we are growing, and we see things differently, but there is an order to things. And I believe that teaching guys the right order and how to see things correctly actually will broaden your understanding of God and your relationship as a child to a father. So fear leads, this is the comment that I'm basing this entire message on. Fear leads to love for God, not dread, inspiring a closer relationship and recognizing God's supreme majesty, holiness, and glory, to be obedient and hating sin. We need to place all our faith and trust in God. This frees us from fearing worldly outcomes. Right, now what a beautiful comment. This is what struck me the most about this comment is fear leads to the love for God. Right, so I'm going to leave it at that for now. So let me just dissect this before I start getting into what I could call the meat of this message. And let's look at the distinction, root versus the fruit. The comment suggests that if you fear God, eventually you will love him. Now, biblically and historically, true filial fear, which is the good kind of fear, is actually a product of love, not the cause of it. So that is what I'm focusing on today. So fear leads to love, which means I fear him, so I learn to love him. The filial view, which means love leads to fear. I love him as a father, therefore I have a terrified fear of hurting him or being separated from him. It's a different type of fear. Now, I love how this was highlighted and that the end goal is definitely a closer relationship and freedom from worldly fear. That is spot on. The one interesting nuance about this that I've been studying is that in the filial relationship, this is the father and child kind of fear. The love actually comes first. Because we know he loves us as a father, we then develop a deep trembling respect or fear because we don't want to grieve the one who loves us. It's not that we fear him so that we can love him. It's that we love him so much we develop this holy fear, as I like to call it, of damaging that bond. Now, we have to obviously look at distinctions here. Dread, as in that dreadful feeling of fear, being scared, isn't always wrong initially. And when that comment says fear leads to love, not dread, that is true for a mature believer. The Bible suggests that for someone who's living in sin or rebellion, dread, the terror of the Lord, is actually a valid starting point because you should be feeling dread. But here's the nuance. Sometimes servile fear is what we call it, which is the dread or the judgment kind of fear. That is our wake-up call. That stops us from sinning long enough to hear God's voice. This acts as a sort of restrainer, and once we are safe in his arms, that dread then matures into reverence as we grow in God. So here's the correction. We don't want to dismiss dread entirely, because for the unrepentant heart, dread is the rational response to a holy God. It is only after grace that dread then vanishes. So there is something right about the comment in that we shouldn't live in dread. I think the only time dread plays a role is perhaps at the beginning. Like I said, that wake-up call to turn us away from destruction. But as the comment says, once we place our trust in him, that dread should completely be replaced by the majesty and closeness that was described in that comment. Now, obedience flows from authority. For a Christian, guys, let me just say this clearly. Obedience flows from authority, not from hating sin. This comment mentions obedience and hating sin, and this is true based on what we call the dominion and authority dynamic. We know that obedience isn't just about avoiding bad things or hating sin. It's about aligning with authority in order to release the power. And you can hate sin and still be weak. This is the point I'm making here. But if we have dominion, you are obedient because you are a representative of a king and you are on a mission. Picture it like a knight in the olden times as a warrior servant to his king, lord, and majesty, and being sent out on a mission to protect the throne. That is the kind of representative we are when we speak about dominion. It is not a proactive, and it's not just reactive. So I really like that point in the comment of hating sin. I've also been thinking about how this ties into dominion. It seems that biblical fear isn't just about us avoiding the sin, but recognizing his authority. So much that we become empowered to act on his behalf. That's the point. There has to be action. It's not just a defensive fear, as in we avoid evil, but it's actually an offensive stance because we are walking in victory. We should love God and not fear the world. Love creates the right kind of fear, not the other way around. Now, it's like I said, this filial fear, the fear a son has for a father, it adds a very cool layer to what the guy that wrote the comment said. It suggests that love for God is actually what creates this holy fear. We fear grieving him because we love him so much, just like a small child loves his father so much he doesn't want to do anything wrong in his father's eyes. So rather than fear leading to love, it is our love that deepens our reverence. Important to understand this. And this is amazing how these two things work together in order to give us this victory over the worldly fears that were mentioned in the comments. So in a biblical worldview, which is what I like to speak about, and we speak about fear of the Lord, this is not a trembling dread of a tyrant who's waiting to strike you down. That kind of fear is often called servile fear. It drives people away from God. The biblical fear of the Lord, if we have to go into the etymology of it and look in the Hebrew, yira, it's a magnetic force that draws you closer to him. How amazing is that? So here's the context of what fear actually is and the specific outcomes the Bible promises that it eventually leads to. So the context is that this fear is about us being in awe and not being anxious. The best way to understand, I think, is to distinguish between being scared and having reverence. So this filial fear, or the word filial as a root, one of the roots, it's more Italian than Hebrew and Greek, if I remember correctly. The Bible frames this as the respect that a child has for a loving father. Or I think Latin, not Italian. Let me not but I'll get to that a little bit later, this filial word. The Bible frames filial fear as the respect a child has for a loving father, or a subject has for a good king, like a knight in the army of his Lord. You are not afraid the father will hurt you. You are afraid of hurting the father or damaging the relationship because you value it so highly. Let me use an analogy here, and I like using analogies. And giving a bit of a descriptive story. So imagine you're standing on the edge of a massive, powerful ocean during a storm. Here in Cape Town, we know all about that. You aren't necessarily scared if you are safely on the shore, on ground, even if it's raining and storming, and you're looking at this turbulent ocean. But you still have a trembling respect for its raw power that is on display right in front of you. Now, you wouldn't treat it lightly if you are standing like maybe on a outcropping of rock, watching this ocean and boil and bubble and waves coming crashing and the thunder and the lightning and everything. You wouldn't turn your back on that, even though you are standing on solid ground. The sense of smallness you feel in the presence of something that massive and powerful, like that massive ocean and storm you're witnessing. This is what we are talking about when we're speaking about the fear of God. The Bible gives us a very concrete definition of what this fear looks like in action. And here's the thing, guys, I say this, I'm so happy that God isn't an emotional being and the Bible isn't based on emotion. This is definitely not about an emotional feeling. It's about a moral stance. It's attitude. And that's where dominion comes in, and we'll speak about that later. In Proverbs 8:13, it says, "The fear of the Lord is to hate evil. Pride and arrogance and the evil way and the perverse mouth I hate." In other words, I don't want any sin in my life, especially deliberate sin, because that is going to lead to me not being in that filial fear relationship of child and father with my Lord. Now, what does this filial fear lead to? And the Bible is surprisingly practical about the benefits of this mindset, this father and child reverence mindset with our Lord. It does not lead to paralysis or anxiety like that crippling, paralyzing fear when you can't move. It actually leads to life and to capability. So let me give you 4 main things that the fear of the Lord leads to. It leads to wisdom. And for me, wisdom is intellectual stability, if we want to be practical. This is the most famous outcome. You cannot actually be wise until you understand your place in the universe relative to God. And this invokes plan, purpose, and dominion. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, Proverbs 9:10 says. So here's the context for you. If you don't respect the architect, you won't understand the building. And I've been speaking with Pastor Ronald as a side note here about the architecture of the kingdom, foundations, using the plumb line of God, which is spoken about in Amos from an apostolic point of view, which are very good discussions that we are continuing. But if you don't respect the architect, you won't understand the building. Fearing God aligns your reality with His, not anyone else's reality. We need to align our reality with our Father's reality. This provides the foundation for us making good decisions as Christians. So that was number one, the fear of the Lord leads to wisdom. Number two, it also leads to intimacy, like I said, relational closeness regarding the sin in our lives that separate us from God. And this is often overlooked. God shares His secrets with those who revere Him. Psalms 25:14 says, "The secret of the Lord is with those who fear Him, and He will show them His covenant." So just as you trust your deepest thoughts to a friend who treats you with great respect, God entrusts His covenant and friendship to those who treat Him with awe. That is something that is completely misunderstood in our Christian world sometimes. It also leads, and this is number three, the fear of the Lord leads to confidence. What? Yes, the right type of fear leads to... Children are confident when they are with their father and they know that they've got that loving father who is supporting and backing them in everything that they do. Fathers, take note on how you treat your children and your place in the home. It leads to confidence. It leads to emotional security. Now, we can go paradoxically on the other end. There's my fancy word for the day, paradoxically. Fearing God frees you from fearing people because we have all authority, we have dominion. It frees you from fearing any circumstance, even though we might go through, just like I was in a car crash 3 weeks ago, and it was a very bad accident on our way to church. Not one person in the car was injured. So we might have had an horrifying experience or circumstance in this crash. God freed us from the fear of actually being in the crash because of our place in Him and knowing that we were protected as His children. So if you fear the highest power, which is God, you have no need to fear any lower powers, guys. You must understand, when God said in the Great Commission, all authority has been given to me, that means it is bestowed on us through Jesus Christ. We need to fear no lower authority or no lower powers, and that is biblical dominion as well. In Proverbs 14:26, it says, "In the fear of the Lord there is a strong confidence, and His children will have a place of refuge." So this basically acts as a fortress. It creates this psychological refuge where you know you are aligned with your Creator, your Father. So then we can ask the question, what can man actually do to me? What can this world actually do to me if we are living in this fortress, this refuge that is the rock in our salvation as Jesus Christ? And number four, the fear of the Lord, it leads, guys, to satisfaction. And what is satisfaction if we have to break it down practically? Quality of life. It is described as a source of vitality that protects you from self-destruction. We tend to destroy ourselves, not Satan, not anyone else outside of us. We destroy ourselves through self-destruction. Proverbs 14:27 says, "The fear of the Lord is the fountain of life, to turn away from the snares of death." And Proverbs 19:23 says, "The fear of the Lord leads to life, and he who has it will abide in satisfaction." So, if you are, inverted commas, scared of God, you will hide from Him, just like Adam did in the Garden of Eden after he'd sinned. But if you fear the Lord, like I've described fear, you will run to Him. The context here, guys, is reverence. It leads to a life where you are wise in your choices, confident in your spirit, and you are then intimate with your Creator regarding your relationship. Now, let's dig into a little bit of etymology here. We're going into the study side of things, so let's go a little bit deeper. This filial fear that I was speaking about in the beginning, for those, we're going to break it down. What does this word for fear mean? Does the Bible use other root words to describe fear? Because it often does. We in English just see the word fear, but the Bible often has different meanings for that one word that are used in different contexts. So if we go deeper into the etymology of this regarding the biblical use of the word fear, it is very important for me to clarify first that filial is not a Hebrew or Greek word that is found in the original manuscripts. It is a theological term derived from Latin that scholars use to describe a very specific type of biblical fear. So here is the breakdown of filial, followed by the actual Hebrew and Greek root words afterwards that the Bible uses to describe these. They basically, if I can put it this way, it's a different sensation of fear. So filial, the word comes from the Latin filius, which means son or child. Like I said, it's that fear that a son and has for his father, or a daughter has for her father. Filial fear is the fear a son has. Servile fear, or servus in Latin, servus, is the fear a slave has for a master. Guys, there is a massive difference here. We are not slaves to a master. We are sons to a father. Let's remember this relationship dynamic. The Bible makes this distinction explicit in the New Testament, and we can always go to Romans for these types of scriptures. Romans 8:15 says, "For you do not receive the spirit of bondage again to fear," which is the word servile or service, "but you received the spirit of adoption, by whom we cry out, Abba, Father." That is filial fear. Now, there are different motivations that come from having these different types of fears. Servile fear is motivated by punishment, like the slave-master dynamic. I obey because I don't want to get hit. Filial fear is motivated by love. I obey because I love my father and I fear the sadness of becoming disconnected to him. That is exactly how our relationship with God should work. Now let's go into the more biblical Hebrew definitions of the word fear. And if we look in the Old Testament, Hebrew is a very physical language. Abstract concepts usually have very physical roots in the Hebrew language. There are two main words for fear, and they are vastly different. Even though we might use the same word when we are reading the Bible in English, you see the word fear, you've got to understand the root difference in context on where it's being used in the Bible and for what reasoning. In the first Hebrew root, we've got yirah, from the root yare, This is a word used in the fear of the Lord, where you go yirat Adonai. The literal meaning is to tremble, to flow, as in gut-wrenching, or to stand in awe. The context of this meaning is the word covers a spectrum. It can mean being afraid, but when applied to God, it also always shifts towards the reverence of God. It describes the physical sensation of being in the presence of something so vast, like I said with the ocean. Like the trembling you might feel standing next to a massive pipe organ. I don't know, I've done this. When you stand next to a massive pipe organ, the vibrating it makes to the floor is overwhelming. You aren't scared of the music, but you are physically overwhelmed. You cannot help it. And there's an example in Psalms 2:11 where it says, "Serve the Lord with fear," and they were using the word yirah here, to tremble, "and rejoice with trembling." Psalm 2:11. Notice it is paired with rejoicing, trembling and rejoicing. Then we can look at another root Hebrew definition for fear, which is pachad, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. This is the word used for dread or terror. And the literal meaning is a sudden alarm or a dread that falls upon you. The context for this is usually negative. It is a fear of our enemies. It is a fear of disaster or the terror of the night. It is a fear that paralyzes and causes panic, completely opposite to the reverent fear of the Lord. So an example of this is when in Psalm 48:6 it says, "Fear took hold of them there, and pain, as of a woman in birth pangs." And that fear is the word pashat. Now let's go into the Greek root words for fear, and this will come mostly from the New Testament. The New Testament writers were writing in Greek, and they also had to distinguish between what we call the bad fear and the good fear. Now, in Greek, we can look at the word phobos, and this is the root of the English word phobia. But in the Bible, it didn't strictly mean an irrational fear. So the literal meaning of phobos is to flight, panic, or terror. But it also evolved to mean respect or reverence for authority over time. The context here is you have to look at the sentence to know which one it is. So let's look at bad phobos in 1 John 4:18. Perfect love casts out fear, phobos, because fear involves torment. Good phobos. Submit to one another in the fear, phobos, of God, Ephesians 5:21. Here it means high respect. Submit to one another. So let's read it with the root. Perfect love casts out torment in 1 John 4:18. And in Ephesians 5:21, that same English word fear, but it's now in a different context. Submit to one another in high respect. Guys, how does that dynamic shift the understanding of those scriptures instead of just reading the two words fear? Perfect love casts out fear. Submit to one another in the fear of God. Now we're going, perfect love casts out the flight, panic, or terror, and submit to one another in high respect of God changes the dynamic of how you read that Ephesians 5:21 scripture. We can also look at the Greek word dailia. This is a specific word that never has a positive meaning in the Bible. The literal meaning of this type of fear is timidity and cowardice, which is definitely the opposite to the dominion that we are supposed to be carrying. For example, for God has not given us a spirit of dailia, fear, or timid. So let's read it in the original root, this 2 Timothy 1:7. If we just have to read it with the word fear, for God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind. But if we read it with the literal meaning, for God has not given us a spirit of timidity or cowardice, but of power and of love and of a sound mind. All of a sudden, the dynamic of that scripture shifts completely towards what we would like to talk about, dominion. So we've got Latin filial, which is son-like. We've got Latin servile, which is slave-like. We've got the Hebrew root yira, which is trembling and awe, or the standard fear of the Lord in the Bible. We've got the Hebrew pashad, which is dread and panic or terror towards enemies or disaster. And then we've got the Greek dailia, which is cowardice, which is literally basically for me a lack of faith or courage. So after all of this serious in-depth studying, what can we take away from this? When you read fear of the Lord, do not think of pashat, panic, or dailia, cowardice. Think of yira, the trembling awe that a son feels for a powerful but loving father, the filial fear relationship. And like I was saying, my church, CARESChurch, has the theme for this year, dominion, living under God's authority, ruling through obedience. And we can tie these two together quite nicely, fear and dominion. This is a powerful theme because it captures one of the greatest paradoxes of the kingdom of God. You only have authority over things when you are totally submitted under God. Let me say that again. You only have authority over things when you are totally submitted under God. In the world, we get dominion by seizing power. That's how wars start. In the Bible, you receive dominion by surrendering to it. It's amazing stuff to grasp, guys. So here is how the fear of the Lord, yira, and dominion, which is the word rada, lock together to create this strength and victory our church is aiming for this year. So let's look at a divine mechanism in the Bible, and I'm going to call this the centurion principle. To understand how fear leads to dominion, we can look at the Roman centurion in Matthew 8. And he told Jesus this. He said, For I also am a man under authority, having soldiers then under me. He understood the secret. He could command his soldiers, which is dominion, only because he was perfectly obedient to Caesar, which was fear and respect for his king. If he rebelled against Caesar, his soldiers would no longer obey him. So here's it, guys. The fear of the Lord is your connection to the power source, which is God. Dominion is the flow of that power through you to the world. And obedience is the wire that connects this power source to the dominion. If you cut that wire, the power stops flowing. So you have loss of fear. We're talking about the godly fear now. If you cut the wire of fear, the power stops flowing and we lose our dominion. Now, you might be asking, yeah, but Vaughan, how does fear create strength? And we can use the reference here of what our theme is from our church, where we say, we're talking about dominion, and then we say living under God's authority, ruling through obedience. So if we look at living under God's authority, the fear of the Lord is not about being weak. It's actually about foundations. It's about structural integrity. It eliminates the fear of man, as we discussed. If you truly fear God, the reverence of Him above all authority, you then stop fearing people, you stop fearing opinions, you stop fearing economical crashes even. And we'll have Adele Benvey back in studio from February to do biblical economics. For those businessmen and people who enjoy listening to a biblical point of view on economics, Adele is amazing. She's got much insight. But let's get back to this. As we discussed, like I said, with earlier with the fear of God, it eliminates the fear of man. You stop fearing people, you stop fearing opinions, and you stop fearing economic crashes. This creates that internal strength that cannot be shaken. It also clarifies our identity. When you live in the fear of the Lord, you know exactly who you are. You are a child of the King. You don't have to fake strength. You are backed by the Creator. Come on now. Here's a biblical example. Joseph. When he was tempted by Potiphar's wife, his fear for the Lord kicked in because of this father-child dynamic. How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God my Father? Genesis 39:9. That internal strength saved him from self-destruction that I was speaking about earlier. So what can we take away? Fear establishes your footing. You cannot fight the enemy if you are slipping on your own pride. And this is what when I start talking about attitude. So let me just say that again. You cannot fight the enemy if you are slipping on your own pride. Now let's speak about how dominion creates victory, as in our second line of our church theme, ruling through obedience. Dominion in the Bible is not about controlling people. This is what people don't understand. It's about bringing God's order to chaos. That is one of our divine mandates when God gave us dominion. Dominion is delegated. God gave mankind dominion over the earth in Genesis 1:26, but we lost it through our disobedience when we sinned. We regain this dominion through Christ by walking in obedience to Him. Now here's the thing. Obedience is the weapon. This is the key to our church's theme. You don't defeat the enemy by shouting louder. You defeat him by obeying God more precisely. Every act of obedience releases God's authority into any situation. Let me give you a biblical example. Joshua. How did he get victory over Jericho? Not by military strategy, because marching 7 times around the city was not strategic, with trumpets playing and worship music going. It wasn't by military strategy. It was by obedience to a very strange command, march around the walls. His fear of the Lord made him obey a very crazy instruction in his mind, and that obedience then released the dominion that crushed the walls. So here's the takeaway, guys. Victory doesn't come from your effort. It comes from your alignment. Now, let me tie this all together and bring it home to my church family. You can visualize this theme like this. You have a cycle of victory, and this cycle consists of fear, which is reverence. I see God as big and myself as His servant. It has submission under authority. I align my life, my business, and my family with His word, the filial relationship, the father-son dynamic. We have to have a flow of obedience. Because I am aligned, his authority flows through me. And then comes dominion, as in our ruling. When I speak or act, I am not acting alone. I have the backing of heaven. Come on now. What is the result of this flow, the cycle of victory? It is strength. I am unshakable. And in my victory, the enemy flees. Now, let's look at a warning and the promise. If you try to have dominion without the fear of the Lord, you become a tyrant or a failure. And we can look at King Saul as a perfect example of this. Go watch the series David, season 1 and 2, if you want to. But better still, go read the story of David in the Bible. But if you maintain the fear of the Lord, your dominion becomes safer and stronger the higher you go. And this is the King David example. So this is my year in summary regarding our theme at CARESChurch regarding dominion. The fear of the Lord is the root. Dominion is the fruit. You cannot have the fruit without the root. So guys, I hope you've heard a little bit of my heart through all of this study of etymology and the origin of words, relating fear and dominion, putting them together, and then establishing our strength and victory and our place in this world and our place with our Father regarding our alignment in everything that we do and how we should be acting as children of the King, as knights in his army being sent out by his divine mandate of the Great Commission, given dominion, all authority. We should fear nothing of this world. The only fear we should have is the fear of the Lord. That filial fear, that relationship that a child has with its father. So guys, thank you for tuning in to another edition of the Cyber Hitchhiker, giving you a bit of deeper understanding, hopefully, a little bit of my heart, hopefully, but a lot of the Lord in everything that I've said today. Coming up next, guys, we have got Tertia Talks Trafficking back in studio for 2026. And like I said, the rest of our content providers will be coming back on board from February. And we look forward to all the content they will give us. But right now, it's a Cyber Hitchhiker saying goodbye and God bless. And we are handing over to Tertia de Klerk from the Joseph Movement, who works with the National Freedom Network regarding exploitation and human trafficking in South Africa, for Tertia Talks Trafficking. Don't go anywhere.